Hey everyone, welcome to That Pedal Show. Dan here.
Mick here.
Rick here.
Hello.
It's a big day in Schwangri-La. We got a very surprised text message from Mr. Rick Beato.
Indeed, indeed.
Sent down a text. Welcome, Rick, by the way.
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for
Thank
being
you so
here.
much for coming, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Incredible.
Sent down a text saying, you guys around? I'd like to drop in and visit. And we're like, what? He's coming here? So we said, yeah,
It's
of
not
course.
Mick Beato, is it? No.
So welcome, Rick. If you don't know who Rick is,
You're living under
push
a
the
rock.
rock off, get out and go and Google him and look at his YouTube channel, because where are we now, Rick?
Around 3.5 million, something like that.
It's 3.5 million subscribers earned through a whole barrage of awesome content down the years.
Incredible.
For which we must say thank you.
Yeah, indeed. It's been so helpful. And we reference it quite a lot. Actually, Mick was saying we do little band sessions in here. He says, yeah, I learned to tune the drum head by watching one of your videos. I'm like, yeah. I was like, yeah, well, I've got the Beato book. And, you know, and I've said this to you before, I love your guitar playing.
Thank you.
Because that was your thing for a long time, right? You were really into jazz.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in the 80s and into the beginning of the 90s. That's what I was a guitar player.
Yeah. And the knowledge in that book, I mean, if anyone if anyone that's interested in learning harmony and learning how all that stuff works together, the Beato book is a really wonderful resource. And you've updated it.
Yes, now it's an online thing with videos and audio examples and everything. I've been updating it, but I wrote it back when I was a college professor back in the late 80s.
Fantastic. Oh, you were a college professor as well?
I was in my 20s, yeah.
Teaching music, presumably.
Yeah, teaching music. I taught jazz studies for 5 years. So I taught, improv, music theory, ear training. I conducted the big band.
Wow.
I mean.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I used to play 5 nights a week playing just with different groups and stuff like that, but playing jazz basically in fusion.
No way. We may well touch on some more biographical stuff as we go along, but Rick did a video with Andersons yesterday where I believe you talked a lot about biographical stuff. Please go and watch that.
And come back here and finish this once you've done
that. To check out that whole discussion. Some of the stuff we want to talk to you about, Rick, is your time as a producer, what you know about guitar tones. Again, if you haven't watched, Rick's done the most amazing videos on breaking down famous guitar tones, telling you exactly what's going on. All that kind of stuff is utterly fascinating.
I was watching the Bow Rap one the other night, and you start saying, this is fantastic. And Brian May pops in. I'm like, come on, it's too much. So great.
Yeah, if you're going to do a breakdown of Bohemian Rhapsody, you have to have Brian May in your video, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
just great. And I love that. I love that you asked him, did you guys practice really hard? And he's like, yeah, no, not so much.
Right.
I'm like,
did a
what
few takes.
the hell?
Right. And the takes are amazing. It's a piano take all the way through. Piano, bass, and drums take all the way through with no mistakes. It's unbelievable.
Really?
I mean, Freddie Mercury was such a phenomenal piano player that he doesn't even. I don't think people even register how good he was and how good. Those guys were such incredibly good players.
Yeah.
Was it? This is slightly biographical. What lit you up about music? I mean, because your whole career's been music. Was it just from the get-go? Did you?
I always loved music, but when I took up the guitar I was 14 or so, and I broke my ankle at the end of the school year, first week of summer, after 8th grade, and I didn't have anything to do. I was in a cast, and I'm sitting on the couch, and my brother had this $1 guitar that I picked up, and I had already played the cello and the bass, so I could read music and stuff, and I had dexterity from playing upright bass, and so I picked up this $1 guitar. It's called a Global, and like a little plywood thing, and I start learning chords. I had a chord book there, Mel Bay chord book.
Yeah, nice.
I start learning chords, and then I had an America song book, and I put on this record, and I'm like listening to it. It's like, that's not the right parts there, had the wrong chords and everything. It's like, that's not what they're playing. So then I start figuring out stuff by ear. And that's like when Night at the Opera came out, Frampton Comes Alive came out, all these great guitar records in the mid 70s. So we had these in the house, and I would just start putting on the records and learning how to play.
Wow.
Learning how to play the songs just by ear. There's no tablature or anything. You just had to put the needle down and figure the stuff out. So I didn't realize I had a pretty good ear. I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
But my friend said, how did you figure that out? Because I was figuring out Larry Carlton guitar solos. Lee asked me yesterday, he's like, what was your first electric guitar? And I was kind of embarrassed. I said, a Black Les Paul Custom. But it was, it was used. It was really beat up, early 70s custom. And this guy, I mowed lawns for this guy, Tom Rizzo, that owned a music store. That's who I got it for. I mowed his lawn, and I worked as a cashier in a grocery store. And my mom helped me out buying my first guitar. And
Awesome. And
it was, but I figured out my first band, I had this drummer, Andy, and he gave me a demo tape of learning covers. And I met him in a music store, and on it was Don't Take Me Alive, Steely Dan, Long Distance Runaround, Yes. All these songs, and I went over, his guitar player his brother was a really good guitar player. And I played the Larry Carlton solo. He's like, how did you learn that? I was like, I listened to the tape. Andy said to learn the stuff and come over and Long Distance Runaround, the two parts.
But you didn't know any theory at that point? Or
No.
None?
None.
No way.
Wow.
So when did that begin?
When I started taking guitar lessons when I was probably 16, 17, I took him from this guy, Tom, and then another guy, Glenn Cummings, and they were like, okay, and I could already had figured out jazz stuff because my dad gave me this Joe Pass Virtuoso record when I was in 10th grade. And when I was 16, he said, if you ever learn to play guitar like this, you've done something with your life. You've accomplished something. My dad worked for the railroad. My parents were real working class. My mom worked in a can factory. They were both very big into music, though. They loved as listeners. They neither played an instrument. But one day, I had this record sitting there, and one day after about 3 months, I was like, I'll open this thing up, listen to this. My dad listened to jazz all the time, so I'm listening to this record, and I was like, get to about the fourth song, All the Things You Are. I was like, I can figure that out. I think I start figuring out. It's like F minor 7, B flat minor 7, and I figured out. So my dad gets home from work. I said, check this out, and I put it on the record and start playing it. My dad was never one. He was a very quiet guy. He was like, how'd you learn that? I said, what do you mean? I just listened to it and learned. He goes, that was it. But that for my dad, that was massive. I was like, wow, Dad, I think Dad's impressed. This is unbelievable. I can figure out his, guitar lines and everything.
That whole thing.
But
Do you have the perfect pitch?
I don't have perfect pitch, no.
You don't. Again, if you've not seen it, Rick did great video with his son, series of great videos with his son Dylan. And Dylan does have perfect pitch.
He does, yeah.
And it's...
But one of my favorite parts of that video, it's incredible. And then you asked Dylan, have you ever used it? Like how much has it helped you? And he's like, no, not at all.
He doesn't think about it. Yeah, I said, when you hear something, and Dylan was only about 9 at the time and everything. I had him in a couple of videos about perfect pitch, and I said, do you ever think of the notes when you're listening to music? No. Only when you ask me.
Right.
So it doesn't bother him when
it never even occurs to him. If
impediment.
something's out of tune or whatever, it never even occurs to him. He doesn't even think about it.
Because that's a preconception about perfect pitch, isn't it? That it's
some
painful.
people say it's painful if it's out of tune. And I had 2 assistants that had perfect pitch early on, back-to-back 2 assistants. I mean,
No way.
And it's rare. It's like 1 in 10,000 people. So to have 2 assistants, and then Dylan, I remember one time we went out to lunch with both of them and Dylan. I was like, I'm the only person in the car that doesn't have perfect pitch. But one of them was really bothered by out-of-tune notes, and the other one wasn't. And then Dylan, he doesn't care at all.
Oh, wow.
So
Amazing.
What's he up to? What's he doing?
He's at Stonehenge right now.
Wondering how they got there. Yeah. So you do the... I promised this wasn't going to be biographical, and it's turning into biographical. Let's jump forward to the production bit.
Yeah.
I'm super interested in this. So you start in someone else's studio?
I did.
As an assistant or something?
I started, so I was in a rock band that got signed to a major label record deal. It's in 1999. And we spent a ridiculous amount of money on our record that came out terribly because the producer who ended up getting fired during the record, I won't mention his name, he would just come in He drank too much. He didn't show up at the studio after about 4 days. And then we did the basic tracks, and me and the singer were doing, I didn't know anything about engineering or anything. We were in NRG studios in LA. We were Royalton. We were at all these different studios paying $2,000 a day and everything. We spent $483,000 on a record. And Kevin Shirley had to come in and fix the record at the end and try to mix these things. No track sheets, 48 track analog. It was a disaster. So anyway, so I finished with this experience, and there's like 4 months until our record's going to come out. And so I said to my lawyer, I'm going to have to go back and teach guitar lessons. I don't have any money. And he says, why don't you produce bands? And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you should produce bands. I was like, I don't know anything about producing bands. I just went through this horrible experience. He's like, I got a band that needs a better demo. I think that they could do something. Go grab the cassette and on your way out and take a listen. Tell them that I said that they need you to produce their demos better. It's like, okay. So I called this band up. There was a band called Left Front Tire. They're from outside of Atlanta. And I produced their, did 5-song demo on a 16-track analog in my friend's basement studio. My friend Billy. He engineered it and everything. And one of the tracks got in the American Pie 2 soundtrack that sold 1 million copies and everything. And I got royalties from it. So the first thing I did
earned you money.
Yeah, earned me money. And it was successful. Then I started to get project after project after project. And then our record came out, and we went on a tour opening for Megadeth. And for like 12 dates, and Marty Friedman and I became friends.
Wow.
And then eventually that tour ended, and then our label got bought out and we got dropped after only a few weeks after the record came out.
No way.
So then I immediately went back into producing. And so I was 37 at the time, and I taught myself how to engineer by asking questions. So I had done this is interesting. I haven't told this story, I don't think, ever, but in 95 or 96, I had my friend Rich said, hey, there's a band that's on A&M Records called Orbit, and they're making a record up in Detroit with a guy named Ben Gross. Ben's a great engineer and producer and mixer. And he did the Hey Man, Nice Shot. What's the band? Mike, what's the band? Filter.
Okay.
He did the first couple of Filter records, and Ben's done a lot of big records. Anyway, so I go to his studio in Detroit, and he's got a SSL console. He's got all this stuff set up. I didn't know what any mics were called or anything. I didn't know. And I was like, how do you decide what to put mics on? And he would just tell me, he's like, and what do you have on the top of the thing? Oh, I have this 414 on the top and a 421. What's a 414? I'm literally writing this stuff down in a notebook about how he mic'd drums. I drew diagrams and everything. Guitar amps, how he mics this stuff. So then when I started making records, so I worked with my friend Billy for about 6 months or so. And then Billy was starting to do some really big rap projects at his studio with Little John and big, like a lot of big Atlanta raps.
Yeah.
So then Billy's like, well, you can engineer on your own. So I went to this other studio, Tree Sound, and my friend Dave Cobb, who was he had a console there. Dave was in this band called the Tender Idols, like one of the first bands I produced. He was actually the guitar player, but he's a big country producer now. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah. So I go there, and Billy's like, I'll come up there. I was like, I don't know how to do this. He's like, I'll come up and check. Just mic the drums up. So I would reference this book, and I placed the mics exactly where Ben said to place them and get the drum sound. I recorded where the face. I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. And I remember the engineer was like, wait, you want to put these 414s on the top of the drums and a 421? And he said, put them out of phase and all this stuff. And I did that, and I got the most amazing drum sound. Billy came by and he's like, sounds incredible.
Wow.
And then I just taught myself engineering from there.
Isn't that amazing? Because how many kids have gone to college to learn that, and they read the book and they learn all this stuff, but actually doing it there and then is because you see it, you hear it, somebody shows you. It's like I've been
fortunate. I've worked with a lot of big engineers too, and that made a lot of records that I love the sound of. From Randy Staub, who did the Metallica Black Album and stuff, and Randy mixed some stuff around. I worked with a lot of mixers and a lot of well-known engineers, and I would ask them tons of questions, write stuff down, or I remember things pretty well.
Let's jump into recording some guitars, because it's something that we get asked about, understandably, a lot. The way we record on the show is primarily to try and capture what's happening here in the room. As a producer,
Yep.
is it the same concept, or is it, how are you approaching it? Are you approaching it, let's find a guitar sound that would fit in this track, and like, what's the first thing as a producer? Guitar player walks in, puts his amp down. What do you do?
So depending on what the context is, I will. It really depends on the type band it is. I'll usually try to find something, if it's a rock band that's like a 2-guitar band. I try to find. I don't like the having a typical big mono sound where you play the same thing out of both speakers. I like them to be different tones. They have to be similar enough so it sounds like stereo, but you're going to get a wider stereo image by doing something different with the sound, putting a tube screamer in front of one and playing the same parts, playing on different guitars that have different pickup configurations, something to give they need to sound similar enough that it sounds like a stereo double track, for example, in a chorus, but they have to have a different tonality so that it makes a stereo image widen.
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's what I call big mono. Even if it's the same part with the same guitar, double tracked, it's still going to sound kind of mono-ish.
Sure.
Okay. Unless they're playing really different parts. Now there are bands and records that historically would play, like a band like Pearl Jam, for example. If you listen to a song like Dissident, that's off their second record. Now on that song, there's a main guitar part that's in the left speaker and a second guitar part that only comes in sporadically, that's played in the other speaker. One's on a Les Paul, I believe one's on a Strat. The one in the right speaker is on a Strat. And it's a real stereo part. And in the chorus, you can hear a distortion pedal come on, and there's a main part in the chorus. So there's 3 distinct guitar parts. And to me, that's like the classic sound of famous records that you would hear. It's kind of like if you listen to Stairway to Heaven. When Jimmy Page comes in, you have the guitar, and I believe it's in the left speaker, and the reverb is in the right speaker. Yeah. And then the recorders come in. John Paul Jones does a 4-part recorder thing. And so that's in the right speaker, but the reverb of that is in the left speaker. Wow. This used to be how stereo imaging was done. Andy Johns did that. Yeah. These guys that were brilliant mixing engineers, recording engineers, knew how to create stereo. Angie by the Stones. Guitar comes in one speaker, the reverb's in the other speaker. Van Halen comes in, you did
a great video on that.
Yeah, so this was a common thing to create stereo. You'd take a mono sound and put the reverb in the other speaker, which was done like with Van Halen. That's after the reverb, is done in the control room, let's say.
And that's just the wet reverb, right? There's
wet reverb,
just no dry signal in that. Yeah.
Just in the other speaker. And this was a common thing in the 70s to use that kind of wet dry thing, but between 2 speakers to create a stereo image. And then they would, like in Angie, for example, so Keith comes in with his guitar part, one speaker, reverb in the other speaker. Then the piano comes in on the next phrase, piano's in the other speaker with their reverb in the other thing.
Wow.
Right? But then when it comes to the first chorus, a second acoustic comes in the right speaker, and the piano goes to the center for the rest of the song.
Okay.
So they're using panning and they're using effects in a very creative way to create the illusion of stereo. Well, it's not the illusion of stereo. It is stereo. And it was really, really brilliant. These guys invented this stuff.
Yeah,
these people, these mixing engineers, producers invented these things.
And presumably out of a limitation of what they had available.
Yes.
So in order to make more than the sum of its parts, essentially. Right. Whereas now we've got everything.
Yeah.
We don't know how to use it.
One of the things, though, about I did so much experimenting trying to get original guitar sounds where I would use maybe 2 different amplifiers together, and I have a little labs distribution box. Yeah. Radial makes them. A lot of companies make them where you can split the signal. The one I have goes 1 in and 3 out, 3 different amps. And sometimes I'll do, if I want clarity, I was talking with Butch Vig about this. Sometimes you'll have an amp with distortion. You put like an AC30 on to get the clarity, and if you're having chords and stuff that need, if you have an F sharp chord with open B and E strings, right? That has more dissonance in there because you have that rub between the A sharp and the open B string there. And to get the clarity, you want a cleaner sound, but it has to have, you can't have like a clean Fender
Yeah.
Yes,
That
that
kind of
chord. Yeah, like Alex Lifeson chord. So if you can't have a super clean amp in there because it's going to sound, it doesn't blend well.
Yeah.
So you have to have a
Transients
sound
are-
with, correct.
yeah.
So you have to have a pushed sound. So I'll have an AC30 in it with maybe a, some type of a gain pedal in front of it to give it some more meat, but still where you have the clarity. And I blend the two sounds, maybe a JCM 800 and that together on one side, those two amps to create one sound.
Was some of the drive for that? We were talking about this the other day when you were talking about the Haas effect.
Yes.
And the fact that it becomes stereo enables that vocal to sit down the middle a little better. Is that part of the drive for that, do you think? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that's where, if you have that big mono sound, it's very hard to fit a vocal in the center because it just takes up all the middle of the mix, even when the things are hard panned. So these are I would just, because I mixed my own records as well. Not all the time. Major label records, you have a mixing engineer on some of them, but I mixed 95% of the records that I did too. And you want to have nice stereo imaging, and you have different, which is created by having different mono parts. If I had if I'm miking a Leslie cabinet, many times I'll mic it with 3 mics, but I'll blend it to mono. Sometimes I'll have it in stereo, depending on how big, when you're listening to a sound on a, if I'm listening to a sound from anything from the 70s, for example, typically a Leslie from an organ is going to be in mono. It'll just be in one track because you just didn't have the tracks. You might have 2 tracks in the drums, or you'll submix things down and then you have to and bounce. But I would always do things like I would never record 2 mics of a guitar amp onto 2 separate tracks in Pro Tools. I always thought, because I started on tape, I always would be like, that has to be one sound. The top and bottom snare mic, one sound. I just blend them, them at the console.
It's fascinating what you were saying about, you've got that sort of thick guitar sound and then you add in something a little more percussive like an AC30 with a little more treble. I don't know if you have any analogies for this. I've always thought of a mix as being like a great plate of food. So you've got something earthy and meaty, but you've got some sort of herb flavor, and it's a combination of crunch, texture, and flavor. So you've got, it becomes 3-dimensional.
Yeah.
Do you think about it in that way, or have you got another way you think about it?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the 2 amp thing is kind of different than having 2 pedals and one sound, right? Because that's going to create one sound. The combination of layering those things will create one sound. Whereas when you use 2 different amplifiers, you're creating a sound. And then the other side, you might have something different as well.
Sure.
Or you may use a different miking combination. But there's so many different things to think about with this, right? Once you get a great sound through the amp in the room, then you're just like, how do you capture that sound?
Yeah.
And how does it fit in the track? Is it too big for the track? Because sometimes it'd be, if you listen to these Van Halen sounds, you'd high pass them. And the things that people don't think about a lot of times is that sounds that you hear on records are going through a recording console. They're going through, they might go through, if it's a record from the 70s, it was done on tape, it comes from a microphone. It could be a tube mic, let's say it's a 57, just one mic, comes into the console, a Neve console. Well, you got a couple transformers in the preamp section. You have you go through the EQ section. Even if you engage it and don't EQ anything, that creates a different amount of harmonic distortion. Then it comes out of the console. You might go through, if it's a cleaner sound, might go through an LA2A, and you go through some tubes, a compressor. And then you go into the tape machine, hits the tape, and get some more harmonic distortion from the tape. Then it comes back out into the console for playback. And then when you're mixing it, everything's going to a 1/2-inch 2-track and getting more harmonic distortion. I mean, sometimes a guitar sound back in the day could have gone through 12 different transformers and taped twice.
Yeah.
So to think that a guitar sound is that, whether it's Mark Knopfler or Eddie Van Halen or Brian May, that a guitar sound is what they played in the room, you got to take into account, how was it EQ'd on the mix down in the control room? Was the tape speed manipulated? Did they slow the thing down or speed it up, which changes the tone, right?
Totally.
So there's so many different elements that when you're trying to mimic a guitar tone, I'd be like, I might say to somebody, "Oh, I'm trying to get this Van Halen thing." It's like, well, that's EQ'd on the console anyway, so you're never going to get exactly what it is. You can get close. I mean, I'm just saying, for example, but rarely do the people not engage some type of EQ.
Yeah.
Sure.
Or
If
even
they're
as you
mixing.
say, the very fact that it's running through all that gear
That's right.
has an effect in itself.
Right.
And that idea, talking about stuff like the harmonic distortion and all the extra harmonics that are created, it's like glue, isn't it? It's like the glue that makes that sound what it is and what you come to know and love. And if you've ever tried this, if you ever have gone out and picked up a nice modded plexi and put it, attached a variac to it and tried to play some Van Halen, it's an aggressive, in-your-face, arresting noise that doesn't sound like the smooth, beautiful thing that comes out of a Van Halen record.
Yeah.
And I guess that's part of all of that.
Yeah.
Do you ever get to the point where there's too much of that stuff and it starts to cave in on itself?
Yeah. You have to gather, getting the right sounds to mix together is really, really difficult. When I interviewed Daniel Lanois, we talked about how he recorded. I mean, he got some of the greatest sounds of all time.
I can't wait to watch that.
I mean, it's really, and he talked about different records and how they got different sounds, and it's absolutely fascinating. Here's a guy that learned literally in his mom's basement. He and his brother started their studio, and they would learn from recording hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of records.
That's far out, man.
Amazing.
Hands on.
Okay. Is there any gear? Guitar player walks in and it's got something and that's going to sound good. Has there been anything consistently that you've seen guitar players walk in and that they always record beautifully? Or can it be literally anything?
Usually when I would produce, when 95% of the time people that would come in, their gear would sound bad because they'd be out on tour and everything would be beat up. Doesn't matter if they're major label bands, whoever, usually their stuff wasn't in good repair, which is why I started collecting all the gear. That's people wonder, why do you have so much gear? It's because I didn't want all my records to be using the same amplifiers, the same guitars, the same drum sets, use different snares on different songs, different, and from project to project. So, and everything is well maintained. When you're traveling around, AC30s are not great to be bouncing around in vans and things like that. They don't work very well. I mean, a lot of guitar amps are like that. So, I would tend to use mostly my own gear.
Right.
Okay, so you have control. Rick has 60 amps, by the way.
I have 60 amps and 60 guitars, I think. But I saying how I didn't play guitar for years. And one of the reasons I didn't play guitar, I worked with these bands with all these low tunings and they'd have drop tunings and everything. And I don't want to sit and play guitar that's tuned down to A or anything. Right. I have 6 Les Pauls that are all in different tunings. And they've all got, 56 on the low E string, but it's not the low E, it's the low B.
Yeah.
And so I would never sit around and fiddle around or anything because, well, first of all, there were no guitar solos rarely guitar solos in any of the music I produced at that time. That era in the early 2000s, there were almost no guitar solos.
Well, yeah, I remember that.
In the metal music.
The dark days.
Yeah. I have a question about that. So thinking about those heavier guitar sounds when you're tracking, the dissonance caused by distortion on chords. Did you ever get into the tracking separate strings thing?
No. Mutt Lange.
Yeah, and actually, I interviewed Colin Richardson once, and he was doing it with a band, Napalm Death and a few other classic British metal bands. And I was actually at a session while he was doing it, and they were playing. It's quite a complex riff, right? But they were playing a full chord, and it might have a major third or some other thing that's going to cause an issue. How would you deal with that then? Just tune the damn guitar.
Typically, I would make players play with the least amount of distortion they could play the parts.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And if they use pinch harmonics, I would turn up the preamp on those pinch harmonics and stuff. But they would realize too that the sound would always be better when when it wasn't super saturated because you have no dynamics.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
Eventually you kick up the preamp to a certain thing, and then it's so compressed, there's no dynamics.
Yeah, right.
And I'd be like, You got to back this off. No, and I can't play my riff like this. It's like, yeah, you can. Trust me. Then you go in and you hear it and they're like, oh, it sounds great. And then the guys would start, I said, if you need to do the pinch harmonics, we'll gain it up or use a pedal for that. Or live, you can play with more distortion. But in the studio, it will sound better. Trust me, especially when you start layering stuff.
Yeah.
If you use less gain.
That's amazing.
So you just use as enough to where you still have dynamics in the amp and you get there's much more harmonic content and it just doesn't sag and get super compressed. I hate that sound.
Yeah.
I don't hate it, but it's,
Hard
when
to work with.
you talk about Van Halen.
Yeah.
He backs off the volume knob and everything and the clean parts of the verses and it's one take all the way through and he hits the choruses and it just sounds incredible.
Yeah.
I have another theory then, Rick, that I'll test on you. Is that the addition of volume makes playing with less gain a bit easier because would you agree with that?
Totally, 100%.
Okay, good.
Yes.
It's good. I feel like we're
because the amp and the guitar react together.
Yeah.
When you're playing a louder guitar, and I mean I noticed it right here when you guys are playing. It just has a more has a fullness.
Yeah.
I would always have people track whenever possible, track in the same room as their amp, but you can. I said this yesterday actually with Lee that you can get feedback if you go up to the monitor speaker if it's loud enough. With your guitar that's being mic'd and your amp is in a different room, your cabinet, but you go up to the monitor speaker and put your guitar there, it'll feed back.
Yeah.
So
you can get that. So in the time that you've been recording guitar, then everything has changed.
Yes.
In a huge way. We've gone from a purely analog world to a now mostly digital world or a hybrid world. Has it got easier? Has it got harder?
Well, it's easier because there's things there's cab simulators and things that you can use your amplifiers with. There's modeling stuff like that. So it's easier in some ways, but it's but the access to any kind of gear, microphones, mic preamps, pedals, amplifiers, guitars, there's all these boutique builders, everything out there now. And you have the most variants now that you can get. You can just do so much right now. It's so much easier. And with digital recording, obviously anybody, you get, if you buy a Mac computer, it comes with GarageBand and just open it up. You can record.
You can play. Yeah.
So it's far, far easier. I mean, if you were going to fix a part, Steve Lukather and I were talking about that, do we chance fixing this part? If there's something. Not him. He wouldn't make a mistake.
You've mentioned a few people today. Who have we talked about? We've talked about Butch Vig. Can you honk Butch Vig, please? And you've talked about
Daniel
Lanois. And we've just had Lukather.
Very good.
I'm sure we've had some more, but it wouldn't be right if we didn't honk those. This is the name drop horn, by the way.
But it's fascinating to ask guys like that have done so many sessions to hear how they did things and
the level of musicianship that those guys have.
Yeah.
It's astonishing.
Yeah.
But like you said, if there was a mistake, trying to drop in, man alive.
Butch Vig, he talked about that, about dropping in, because he was the one that said that if it had a mistake, and he was Butch being a drummer, it's really good punching in and out because you have to do a split second before, and you got to have the out point be in the right spot. I did a record with my old band, and the engineer accidentally erased. We had a live take with two guitars, bass and drums, and I did the intro thing, and the engineer, getting to the mixing stage, he accidentally erased over a couple bars of my intro that was not played to anything. It was on tape, and oops.
Oh, no.
And then to try and punch it in and match the sound was like impossible, And in Pro Tools you could just take in it from up front. So that part of it is far, far easier. But people used to use samplers and take vocals, even back in the 80s, and they would take a whole chorus section and put it in a sampler and place it in a second chorus. They didn't always re-sing every part.
Not every part. What about the camaraderie of a group of musicians playing together? Like you were saying, your band does a take and it's two guitars, bass, drums, or whatever, and then you overdub after. How do you feel about that versus just starting from the ground up tracking?
Yeah.
I would try to keep as many tracks as I could from the initial tracking. If I had a band that was a really good live band, I would track to tape and then dump it in.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But that was very, very rare
Oh, wow.
that the people could play well enough that you could keep the parts. But some of the ones that could, where you have a drummer that could play a part without a mistake. Sometimes I would record into tape and do a few different takes, and then I would take the drums and bass and I would piece together the thing. If it was a good verse and chorus here, I'd be like, play more dynamically in the bridge or whatever. And then you use that. It'd be like tape. It would be the same thing in tape editing.
Sure.
I think a lot of people would be surprised at just how hands-on that whole process is in terms of, what you hear as a finished record is a million processes.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays, I was watching Billie Eilish with her brother Phineas, and they were talking to David Letterman, and he had 80 little snippets for her lead vocal that was comped from. And Billie Eilish is a great singer and doesn't need 80 things, but that's what it took to get this vocal where he felt like he wanted it, the performance he wanted. And that's how records have been done for decades.
Yeah.
Okay. What's on your pedal board?
Well, my pedal board, I used to have about 13 pedals on my pedal board when I played in a band.
Okay.
If I could remember,
Let's count them off.
Boy. Now we're going back 25 years now.
Right. What are the
I know things that I had on it. I don't remember the order.
Yeah.
I had an MXR flanger from 1978.
Yep.
I had a Memory Man,
Nice.
from way back with a cable.
Mm-hmm.
I would have I had a Bifet preamp. Is that a pedal? Like an old,
You mean the Electro-Harmonics thing?
it's, I don't remember who made this pedal.
Yeah. Anyway.
I had a,
Not the FA2A, the Boss one, the old Boss.
it was not, well, I did have a micro amp
Right.
that I used that I would use. I had,
It's basically all the pedals that were available 25 years ago.
I had a Boss tremolo, pan tremolo pedal,
Yeah.
which is a great pedal
Yep.
Yeah.
that they discontinued. I don't know why. That I still have. I have all my original pedals from back then. Geez. I'm trying to picture my pedal board right now.
Right.
I had a wah-wah, a Vox wah-wah.
Nice.
Um,
And what were you going into?
I had a two JCM 800s.
Yes.
So I had two full stacks.
Yes.
Come
you did.
on.
Original 70s. I traveled with two full stacks, and I had two JCM 800 heads. One was a 50 watt from 1981, and one was a 100 watt from 84. Both were vertical inputs.
Okay.
Okay.
And through four basket weave, no, not basket weave, the checkerboard fronts and everything, the 70s with greenbacks. So it'd be,
Amazing.
what would be 16 greenback, 1600 or 400 watt cabinet, 100 watt cabinets.
I've never done that. Have you done that?
Nope.
No.
And
we
the
gotta do
singer
that.
from my band, he had two stacks, and he used JMPs, early 70s, like 71 JMPs, full stacks with, but he used different speakers. He used, I think he used vintage 30s in his cabinets.
Right.
Wow.
Amazing.
That's loud.
Wow.
And our bass player had two SVTs, two
course he did.
810 SVTs, and our drummer had a big John Bonham.
Right. So you guys were properly
We were
doing the
properly loud.
business.
I know the playing in a loud band and everything, but two stacks. I mean, that's why I have people are like, why do you have so many stacks? And it's like,
Is this awesome?
because why? It's rock and roll.
Yeah.
Amazing. So good.
Is it over, Rick? Is that over? We discussed this quite a lot. The available modeling technology, and we see bands going out now with no amps and in ears, and it's not an experience that I would say we've loved yet. Where are you on all of that?
So I went to a show the other night, and there were no amps on stage. And some shows I go to, there are amps on stage. It really depends. definitely playing through amplifiers is not over. It will never be over. But there is a convenience thing. It's so hard to tour nowadays that
right.
that's the problem that traveling with stuff, it's hard to move a 412 cabinet that's in a road case, especially move move
4 of them.
Yeah,
Actually,
8 of them.
12 of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Far out.
It's so, but if you can do it, I would do it.
Yeah.
If I was out playing, I'd be playing through an amp.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think that's how we feel about it. Maybe before we ask you some questions about what's next for Rick Beato, we'd like you to have a listen to the kind of the sounds that we use, and we'd like to your opinion and what you think, and whether this is the kind of thing you have used or you would use, or you're like, yeah, man, we did that in '86, whatever. Because one of the things Dan and I are quite passionate about is this idea. And when you were talking about stereo earlier and having the reverb over there and the dry sound over there to create that field, it struck me that that's kind of, it's part of the
Where we
basis.
live. Yeah.
But the wet dry
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, none of this is new, right? This all happened
Absolutely.
decades ago. But I don't know. We just maybe
that is the basis of, that's what a wet dry thing is.
Yeah.
Is that and people used it to create stereo back then, and which is I think a brilliant thing, and it sounds great in the room too.
Yeah.
And it was all post then, right? So just for clarity, Ed's amps would have been in one room, it gets recorded, and then the reverbs get added.
Yeah.
Post processing off the console.
Yeah.
Let's see what you think. What are some of your what's your like core go-to guitar tone? What do you love? Where's home?
It depends on what it is.
Okay. Let's plug in.
Yep. So why don't we start with one of our what we call TPS wet dry.
Yeah. So when we say wet dry, it's not quite true because the dry is still in the wet side. So it's more like damp dry.
Wet damp.
And by the way, this ridiculous pedalboard is an experiment at the moment. It's not.
Cool.
I was about to say I wouldn't actually use this. I do actually use this, but it's because I'm in the middle of learning the H90 at the moment, so that's why it is what it is. Okay then, Rick. Let's just amps today. Deluxe reverb reissue, just a standard deluxe reverb reissue, and a J1045 reissue. So, yeah. The pedalboard is so ridiculous I can't reach that angle.
Sounds great.
How do you feel about the low end?
I think it's got really good low end.
Yeah.
Really good low end.
Because we were talking earlier about you'd high pass if you were recording. Would you get rid of a lot of that? Or?
No. Well, it depends on what's in the mix.
Yeah.
If it's out by itself, I'd record it just like that. And but once you start getting in with drums and stuff, maybe I'd be high pass it at 100 hertz or so. But if it's out front, if that type of a part that's clean like that, might be by itself, might be in one speaker, might be you can do the wet dry where if you have the 2 amps and they're spaced out a little bit, you can record one and actually still put them in each speaker.
Right.
And it would actually sound like a wet dry in that way. Yeah. You record a stereo part.
So I'm guessing you've seen a Lexicon 224.
I have, yeah.
Plenty,
Used
the real
one many times, and plugins ones, and yeah.
Do you like it? Is it a thing?
It's one of the best digital delays or digital reverbs ever made.
Okay. So we've got it doing a room at the moment.
Yeah.
Which is.
We love it because it doesn't sound like a pedal. You know what I mean? It sounds like...
Does it sound like a pedal?
It sounds to me like what you would hear in the control room when you add it in.
Yeah.
And put it on a bus.
It's so good.
Yeah.
We were obviously just after vindication today. And they get one of the bigger ones up, Dan. One of the.
I mean, you never would hear that back in the day. You'd never hear reverb pedals that are that lush and beautiful sounding.
Yeah.
It's just, really unusual. Sounds amazing. That sounds great. I mean, these are all perfect sounds, but you're starting out with great sounds already,
Yeah.
right? So that
Right.
they're perfectly balanced. The tone coming out of the amplifiers. This is just enhancing it beautifully.
Yeah.
What we've got there is one of the harmonic tremolos is going down one side and the delay just down one side either. So you might hear that in the mix a little easier. But then we've got another tremolo at a different speed in the other thing, and the danger is here it can get a bit soupy because you've got one in one side and one the other. Just listen to that for a sec, Dan. Why am I playing so badly today? Because he's here.
Now, to me, that's a harder sound to make work because
Yeah.
it's a slower. The modulation is a little bit slower on it, and you have notes will duck in and out and things like that. So it
Yeah.
really depends on what the part you're playing is.
Yeah.
Sounds better probably with single notes maybe than chords, even though it sounds good with chords. Depending on what it's all about the part. Any sound can sound good with the right part.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, good. That's
Very good.
that's what we want to hear. Just a couple of gain sounds then. So it's got to be the hardest thing, hasn't it? Overdrive, getting it, like you were saying earlier, trying to encourage people to use a bit less gain so you get the clarity of the guitar and all of that. Let's see what you think of this. We did record a video for Rick's channel where we go through a bit of this, by the way. So if you've watched that, we might be going over some similar ground. So the way Dan and I tend to do it is we'll have usually a fuller overdrive first and a boosty thing second to give a bit of clarity. Because obviously if you have the boosty thing first and the hard overdrive next,
It's just more gain, more
can squash.
limiting.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Does, yeah, it does exactly what we're talking about.
Bearing in mind, this is a Strat, right? Can I have number 1 reverb, please, Dan? How do you feel about the top end of that?
To me, it's a little too toppy. It'd be better with a humbucker with the SG from before. That's a little bright, I think.
Yeah.
I think that tone with an SG or Les Paul. SG would be really or Les Paul, either one.
Let's try Les Paul. It's quite a bright sounding Les Paul, this actually.
Yeah, it really depends on the guitar.
Because I think one of the things we've learned over the years is that once you get into a mix or in a band, having that little extra top can help get you heard, but it does sound a bit crispy maybe. Okay, let's try this. That's all right.
I love that. It sounds great. I still hear the top end crispiness on it with that, but that has obviously much more of a, much more like 1 to 2K mid bump in it.
And being supported in the mid like that kind of mitigates the.
It does.
Yeah,
It does.
it is.
It's all about, if you have if you add bass, it masks the top end. If you add top end, it masks the bass and things like that.
Right.
So there's all these things about that, but that's a great sound. I mean, the Strat sound, it depends on the context.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I guess that's the truth of it, isn't it? The here we are listening to all these guitar sounds in isolation the whole time, and really,
I mean, there are sounds where you're like, oh, that's a bad sound. It's got a
Yeah.
buzz in it. It's got, it's shrill, whatever it is. And,
Sure.
But you're pretty much not going to get a bad sound out of this rig. I hate to say it.
happy
but
days. I've got one for you.
That was a great sound.
Yeah,
That was probably my favorite sound I've heard today.
Hooray,
Awesome.
ring modulator.
Awesome.
Okay, we could do that for hours, but thanks for listening to that, Rick. What does the future hold for you then? So we're 3-point-some million subscribers. Where's your ambition? What do you want to do?
I just make videos on things I'm interested in. So I wanted to keep doing that.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I've done since being my channel.
Great.
I make videos on topics that and I interview people that I admire. So I want to continue to do that.
And that we all admire greatly.
Yeah.
And thank you. Those interviews that you've done, I think, in generations to come will be such a resource.
Yeah.
And I think will be known as be actually really seriously important works.
I think it heralds a paradigm shift too.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't that long ago where maybe some of the more serious media might look down their nose a little bit at YouTube and the quality of what can be achieved there. And I think you're absolutely out the front proving that wrong
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
in a big way. And I think that is carrying the flag for all of us in a credibility sense. And we must thank you for that work.
Indeed. Yeah.
Appreciate
Indeed.
it.
It's amazing.
Because it's a big deal and it's appreciated.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been crazy. It's been crazy.
We could talk for 25 hours, so we had to pick something. But yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate you. Thanks for inviting me here. This has really been great.
You're so welcome. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, do all that stuff. Thank you to our friends who've gone to thatpedalshowstore.com and grabbed some merch. Also, massive thank you to our patrons on Patreon. I'm finding it hard to get the words out. I'm still all a fluster.
we don't need any words. All the information's in the description below. Please check Rick's channel out if you haven't done already. We will see you soon. Thank you for
Indeed.
being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rick.
Bye.